All of a sudden, whew, claws went back. I go, because I'll go back there. I'll give him a piece of my mind. No. We had everything we needed and then some. So, and you might say, your listeners might say, that's self-defense. I go, yeah, because I preserved her and I preserved us. I preserved without the clash. Now, my two dear friends in the martial arts who were fighting each other, I call them friends, even though I only know them peripherally, right? That they were fighting each other at that tournament and get mad. They didn't preserve each other. Their narratives interacted improperly, right? So the director interrupted the narrative and stopped the situation, preserving both of them. I interrupted the narrative at the university from the administrator and preserved relationship. That's what we talk about, the narrative. So if we take it to a self-defense situation where someone's going to hit you, someone's going to attack you, something like that, if it's not perceived in that way, there's a narrative that the bad guy has in his or her head, and they're looking for someone to play a role, someone to play the victim role. And if we go to the far end of the spectrum, someone who's going to try to take someone to a secondary location, hurt them, like you see in crime dramas, right? They're looking for someone who fits the narrative. Certain look, certain hair color, certain size, certain physical build that reminds them of someone who hurt them years ago. And they're playing out a story, a narrative. They're looking for the victim to fit the narrative. If you interrupt that, you interrupt the storyline, there's your biggest self-defense tool. People are afraid of pain. People also are often afraid of sensation, and they're afraid of engagement. And somehow we've created a narrative that things are supposed to be always sunshine and rainbows. And that's not necessarily the case. So in many ways, I feel like because society has become so divorced from nature, many people live separated from the natural world.
Let them grow wild and free, wild like you, baby. Dress me in dandelions.
Welcome to Wise and Wild of America, a series meant to inspire and empower you on your self-discovery and self-authorship journey. I'm Adina Tabija, and I have the special honor and privilege to host here today my Kung Fu Sifu, Dr. Steve Jackowicz. Sifu, welcome and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Well, Dina, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm glad to be able to come today and talk to you and talk to your listeners and hopefully say something that they find interesting.
So you are already a featured guest in my Wise and Wild in America series of interviews, which is available on my website, soul.center, and I will include the link in the show notes. It's an extraordinary interview, and I recommend it to everyone, and especially to all the students in Asian medicine. So today we decided to focus on martial arts, a topic we didn't quite touch in our 2020 interview, when we focus more on your doctor, alchemist, Taoist path, although I realized that the warrior is not separated from all those other aspects of you. So before we dive in with my questions, please allow me to read your bio, and then we'll start our conversation. So Sensei Sifu Steve is a graduate of Harvard University, where he double majored in East Asian languages and civilizations and folklore and mythology. He then went on to study East Asian medicine, focused on traditional orthopedics, including acupuncture, herbology, and bodywork, becoming the first foreign graduate from Hyundai Kim Sul-won in Seoul, Korea. Sensei Steve returned to the US and studied further for a master's degree at the New England School of Acupuncture. He then went on to study on his PhD at Boston University, examining the history and development of East Asian medicine. His studies then took him to China and Japan, where he attended advanced clinical trainings. He is finishing his second PhD through Liaoning University of Traditional Chinese Medicine. He has taught at the university level for over 20 years and served as a chair of the doctoral program in traditional Chinese medicine at the University of Bridgeport for the past 8 years. Sensei Sifu Steve also taught at the University of Bridgeport's Martial Arts Studies Department. He has taught psychology of the martial arts, sociology of the martial arts, kinesiology of the martial arts, anatomy of the martial arts, as well as coaching the university judo team. He is now retired to teach martial arts full-time. Sensei Steve has taught martial arts for many years. He has taught students of all ages and physical capabilities. He has volunteered for 18 years with the Nassau County Police Activity League teaching judo. He has also developed a special needs karate course through the Police Activity League, and he brings a wealth of experience and perspective to the martial arts. He has founded Classical Martial Arts of Long Island to provide the student a platform for the broad study of the physical, mental, ethical, and moral aspects of the martial arts in a safe, fun, and enjoyable environment. That's from your website. Maybe you can mention your website and how you can be found at the end. So I can testify it is safe, fun, and enjoyable since I've been there since 2022. So when you told me in 2022 that you were leaving your position at the University of Bridgeport to open a martial arts studio, I was intrigued and excited. I always wanted to learn martial arts, but I never actively searched for a dojo or found a teacher to inspire me to study. So over the years, I had the opportunity to study various practices with you, including acupuncture, herbology, Korean physical manipulation, and Qigong. So I use them in my clinical practice every day. So you teaching martial arts was an unexpected bonus for me. I also took it as a challenge. I don't think it's a secret for anyone that we practitioners of medicine, but also we parents or we community members are always advocates, warriors to the well-being of our families, patients, community, ecosystem, whatever it is that we choose to serve. So we are already in this kind of sympathetic overdrive. So for me, it was a challenge at that level. So to speak for myself, but I think this is a universal experience for anyone enrolling into a martial arts program. I had to weigh on one hand this sympathetic overdrive, but also the multidimensional benefits of attending a martial arts program, from self-discipline to structure, overcoming fear, overcoming resistance, the joy of play, and many more. So I chose for myself to be curious about my limits and trust the hormetic effect of this program, resulting in increased ability to handle more stress over time, although the short-term challenge can be intense, especially when it comes to competitions and belt tests. I've seen many people giving up, unfortunately, including my own daughter, my younger daughter, who after getting her orange belt decided this is not for her. So at least for now. So here comes my first question for you. Is this for everyone? And what does it take to become a disciple in martial arts? Why would someone choose an accelerated, embodied warrior curriculum, and how to balance this equation?
Okay. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. I'll mention one thing where if you take a look at the website, a lot of times it says Sensei/Sifu. And sometimes people are familiar with the martial arts. And the reason we have that is because we teach both Japanese styles and Chinese styles. And the Japanese say Sensei, which literally means the one born before you, someone with more experience. And then the Chinese say Sifu, which can either be written with characters for teacher transmitter or written with the characters, which is more traditional, as teacher father. In other words, the teachers as respected as father. So those two terms, when you read or you spoke about my background, you've used both of them, which is great because I play both roles in both teaching Japanese and Chinese martial arts. But maybe listeners, when they hear that, they're like, why was she calling him Sensei Sifu? Right? Those are two different terms, right? But that's why we list it like that on the website with a little slash in between, which you wouldn't hear when we read it out. But to get to your question, is to say, is it relevant? Is martial arts relevant for everyone? Is martial arts relevant in the modern day? And what does it mean to follow that path? So I think part of the answer to that would be we look at, especially from a traditional perspective, a Taoist perspective. They say that in the ancient days, the Tao was unified. The path to understanding was a unified thing. And as society got more sophisticated, the Tao, or the path to understanding, was fractured into 5 parts. And 3 of those parts are maintained in Chinese systems of philosophy and religion, in Confucianism, in Taoism, and in Buddhism. They encapsulate some aspect of wisdom. Confucianism being very much focused on society and the social ways we interact, and the hierarchical or egalitarian ways that we interact with each other, and how those interrelate. Buddhism being related to the mind and mental dynamics, and how the Buddhists will say all is mind, which doesn't necessarily reject physical existence, but says the meaning of everything is in the mind. Because you might have the most wonderful physical existence and still be suffering. So that suffering resides in the mind, not necessarily in the world. And then Taoism, which really the Taoist organized, ordinal, philosophical, religious structure, really talks about the way that one relates to spirituality, one relates to nature, that side of it. But then the other 2 fractures of the Tao, as we call them, we translate them, are medicine, which is how does the body break down? How does it heal? How does the natural world present ways to not only maintain you, but to improve you, to make you healthier, to make you recover? Or how does the natural world carry things that would tear down your health? And how do we navigate that? And that's kind of what I'm sure that your podcast talks about a lot. But when we look at the 5th fracture of the Tao, that's the martial arts. And the martial arts are very interesting because we've chosen, we meaning translators, have chosen to use the word martial arts. And that's fine. But if we look at the words that are used historically, if we talk about the Japanese terms, originally we start with bujitsu, war skills, but then they become budo, martial or war ways, but using the word do, which is the word Tao, a way of understanding through martiality. If we look at the Chinese words, we start with wushu, which means, again, war skills, proceeding to what's called wudao, again, martial way. But the Chinese especially use the word gongfu in Mandarin or kung fu in Cantonese, which means the merit of practice, which is a different concept, that through the practice you come to something more. And that idea is expressed in different words in the Japanese tradition or the Korean tradition or the Vietnamese tradition, right, as opposed to the Chinese tradition. But all of them have the idea that you can come to some level of transcendent understanding beyond the limits of kicks and punches. So kicks and punches and throws and takedowns and hold downs and all these moves, they're great. They'll keep you safe. That's a wonderful thing. Self-defense is an important skill. That's true. But the bigger question is, why would you keep doing it? Because self-defense skills can be acquired with a certain amount of training and maybe maintained with a certain amount of training. But why would you stick with it? Why would you keep going? What's bigger? What's there? And that's what the Chinese call Wu De, or the Japanese call Buddha. Buddha means martial virtue, martial attainment. And this is where you come to the idea of, who am I fighting? What am I fighting? And this is where the universal applicability of the martial arts comes out. Because at first, we think we're fighting somebody else. We think there's some guy in a dark alley waiting to come get us. There's some bully at school waiting to stick us in a locker, right? There's some other guy, whoever the other guy might be. And maybe the other guy is enhanced in our imagination, like the little monster under the bed, who really is just our sweater sitting there, and the shadows make him look so scary. And at first, it's the other guy, and I'm fighting the other guy. And then I start to, over time, as you keep training, saying maybe I'm fighting my fear of the other guy. So there's a level of understanding to change that. Maybe I'm fighting against my lack of confidence, maybe against my lack of presence in the world. Maybe I'm fighting against my foolishness to walk down the dark alley. or to put myself in harm's way. So then maybe the guy I was fighting isn't the other guy as much. Maybe it's me. Maybe how I deal with the world has to change for me to interact with the other person in a different way. That doesn't mean I'm at fault. Never say that the victim is at fault, but rather to say, how am I dealing with the world that I see the other person as my enemy? So some of the great masters, right, like Ueshiba, Morihei Ueshiba, who founded Aikido, he said, "For in all of heaven and earth, now, having known the martial arts, I have no enemy." So that's a personal change of how I view the world. So that's one part of how it has universal applicability. How do I deal with myself? How do I relate to myself? And coming to that understanding, maybe I'm less likely to be the person who's a victim. Maybe I'm less likely to be the person who is in a more dangerous situation. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't be attacked. It doesn't mean you couldn't be in a self-defense situation. And it doesn't mean that necessarily creating that confidence or creating that belief structure or strength is a guard against everything. But it does mean understanding yourself helps you understand and deal with others. And the other side to it is there's two enemies who sneak up on us every day. They're always there, right? The two guys who we fight all the time, time and gravity, right? Time and gravity. And the illusion of time. For time is second cousin to what the Buddhists call demon Ma. The Buddhist demon Ma is a demon of illusion, the demon who makes you think that things are not really the way they are. So that demon Ma makes you think, you know what? Yesterday was real. And yesterday you were like this. And today you're not. Right? And we know time exists, time moves forward. What's our relationship to time? And if we understand that perhaps our perception of time is an illusion. I'm not saying time is an illusion, but time moves on. And physicists would tell us time is moving and acting, and sure. And we are, if we look at pictures of ourselves when we were younger, we're different today than we were yesterday. That's fine. But there's an illusion of time. To say that I'm somehow thinking that I'm less today than I was yesterday, or I'm more today than I was yesterday, as opposed to accepting I'm different today than I was yesterday. And so today is different, and today is new, and today is always vibrant. Today's always what we have, right? The past, the future, they're there, but they're not the now. And can we stay in the now and the response now? And the Buddhist ideas, here in the now is where we find compassion, the ability to be with and address the person in front of us. And compassion might be being kind. That's one aspect of compassion. Compassion might be being stern. Maybe the person before you is not acting kindly. They're not acting nice. Maybe you need to be solid, firm, strong. Maybe you need to defend yourself, whether it's emotionally or physically. And that's still being compassionate, right? Not being vindictive. For we don't seek to be vindictive in the martial arts, but we seek to be balanced and clear. That's the aspect of how we deal with time. And then gravity. The gravity pulls us down. And that's great. Because one day, gravity, Mother Earth is going to pull us back. We're going to lie down. We're going to stay there, right? That's the end of our days, when we're going to be received back to where we started, right? Into the great unknown. And gravity pulls us down, and gravity grounds us. And gravity's great, because without gravity, you'd float off into space, right? And you might laugh and say, well, that's kind of silly. But at the same time, right, we say the gravity, the foundation that the earth provides for us and pulls us down, is the same thing that we want emotionally. We want to be grounded. You say, oh, I need this person to be grounded. I need to be grounded in situations. We use terms that relate to gravity, that are geospatial terms, to describe cognitive emotional response. So we're always dealing with gravity. That's part of the martial arts. If I want to stand on one leg and kick, I have to have a relationship with gravity. Maybe one I never had before. I want to step in certain patterns, move. I want to step, if we're talking about Chinese Kung Fu, tiger steps, dragon steps, they get fancy names. Stepping behind, stepping forward, spiraling, spinning, getting low, going deep stance, going high. We talk about things where we take each other off our feet, Chinese Shuaijiao, or Japanese Judo, or Jiu-Jitsu, where we're going to unbalance the other person and take them to the ground. Well, now we're dealing with a relationship of two people and gravity, a relationship betwixt and between us. And sometimes in those techniques, the other person seems to throw me. But if I relax and I change our relationship to gravity, I can change the relationship and take the other person with me. We call it a reversal. So there's ways of movement, right, that we're talking about the relationship to gravity, either personally or with the other, and the challenges to our balance and our relationship to gravity. And this is where the martial arts also come to, where the other person, who's my partner, who's my helper, or my opponent in a match, challenges my sense of self in a controlled way, in a way we can understand it. And that's where we say the martial arts translates off the mat. To kind of pull that all together to say, how's this applicable to people? Well, in many ways, it's physical psychotherapy. In many ways, it's a way of understanding yourself through physical interaction. Certainly learning how to keep yourself safe, learning how to do techniques that could be used for self-defense, but also learning a lot about yourself. And you said before that your daughter got to a certain level. Yeah, that's great. Maybe that's the level she had to get to. Maybe whatever was at first a spark of interest in the martial arts got fulfilled. And whatever level that is, then you go on. That's why ranks, belts, and the Chinese call them sashes, those are curricular division. We divide the curriculum so we have steps. Just like you go to school, first grade, second grade, third grade, we divide it up. This set of skills leads to this set of skills. Historically, those ranks don't exist. Those are more modern. Those occur starting in the 1800s, where they started saying, how do we get better at teaching that? Because it wasn't so much, shh, hush, hush, secret techniques passed down and not to be taught publicly. The world kind of shifted in the 1800s after industrialization started occurring and society started shifting. And people were like, well, there's a value to this. But maybe it's not so much as much used in the battlefield. Or maybe there's a different shift in the world and we don't have to defend ourselves from ruffians on the street or in traveling from village to village as much as we did before. But there's a value to that understanding. And then to make it easier to learn, there was curricular division. So whatever level one gets to, maybe that's as far as you got to go. Maybe you learned as much as you need to learn. Maybe then you go in other ways and find expression of the same lessons elsewhere. But the last part of the question you asked me was about discipleship. And becoming a disciple to anything is rooted in the word, both discipline, and the word disciple in English is related to the Latin word, right? Discipula, which is a student, someone who is looking and learning something. So if you have the discipline to go through or to study or to look at the martial art, that kind of comes from inside. So how does one become a disciple of the martial arts? In many ways, finding that way as a path to ongoing understanding of the world. That was a long-winded question, but that's what happens when they give you a PhD. You just kind of keep talking. So I'll give back the floor to you, Dean, and we'll go to the next question if you want to.
No, that was great. And talking about time and gravity, I'm just curious, how did you originally feel that pull towards martial arts? What brought you to study martial arts? And if you can share a little bit about your warrior path and how that intertwine. I know you mentioned in the previous interview that your everything with medicine started from an injury from martial arts. So if you can share how these two paths complement each other also.
So great. So yes, I started martial arts when I was a little kid. I was actually, as a little kid, I was asthmatic and was physical and active, but at the same time was always caught short of breath. And always, though I'm a fairly tall person and such, I perceived myself in many ways to be less vibrant, less strong. And as a little kid, used to love to watch kung fu movies on TV. Used to watch what they call black belt theater on television when I was a little kid, and would watch them jumping around. These were all the old kung fu movies. We sometimes call them wire fu because the guys would be pulled on wires to jump so high and whatnot, and they were a little unrealistic. This is, movies that were less serious even than, say, Bruce Lee movies were back then. And I would go in the backyard and I would jump around, convinced that I was trying to learn what they were doing in the movies, and young enough not to even realize that this is movie magic and that it wasn't necessarily possible to run across water or dance across the rooftops. So I had a fascination with it, and begged my mom, oh, let me study, let me go, and she put it off for a while, thinking, it's a fad. I just jump around the backyard. Eventually, got a little bit older, and I convinced her to let me go and start taking some classes, and started to train when I was just I guess what we would now call a teenager, not necessarily a full teenager. And at that point, I was one of the youngest guys that they had going to school, and my teacher was like, maybe tell them a little older. Maybe tell them you're 14. like, because martial arts were a little bit tougher then. They were a little rougher. Not that martial arts aren't tough and rough, but also there were changes that occurred in the martial arts world over time that brought a younger crowd in, a much younger crowd. So at first it was a little bit older crowd. But that's how I started. Started with a perception of being weaker. Started with a desire to learn and do things like I had seen in the movies and on television, and then wound up being fascinated with it and being fascinated with the both the physical practice as well as the philosophical ideas that informed it, as opposed to boxing. Nothing wrong with boxing. I eventually did learn to box. But boxing, at least at that time, was more perceived as a sport, and martial arts were more perceived exotically and perceived in many ways as having some intrinsic wisdom. The martial arts teacher was considered to be maybe a wisdom master in some way, shape, or form. Now, my first teacher, Chung Ji-hun, was Korean, and he was a very nice man, but very intense, and was a man of few words. And so, in that sense, it wasn't that he would say some words that were meaningful, say some words that were somewhat philosophical, but he wasn't the guy who would talk your ear off. And in that sense, that also fulfilled the expectation. Oh, this guy's got to have all that wisdom. I'm not saying he didn't, but I'm just saying he seemed to be exactly like those guys in the movies. Okay. So that's how I started with it, and competed and fought and did forms and weapons and all that fun stuff. Then growing up, and then wound up then when going to college, being able to explore other martial arts, and actually at that point explored more Chinese martial arts. And it was actually when I was in college I experienced the first kind of pretty intense injury. I got my jaw broken and had nerve damage on one side of my face, and I had motor nerve operational. I could move, but I had sensory nerve damage, and so one side of my face was numb from the intense damage that occurred. And one of my fellow martial arts students was an acupuncturist and said, "Hey, go see my teacher. Go get treated." So I did. I saw her teacher, who at that point was not yet famous, but that was Steve Birch, who became a very famous person in the East Asian medical community because he became one of the most well-published people in the pursuit of Japanese acupuncture, and helped to elucidate that tradition in English. And he was successful. With 7 weeks of treatment, I got all the feeling back on that side of my face, and I said, "Wow, this stuff really works." So I didn't want to necessarily study it. I just, wow, that really works. Well, went through my undergraduate degree, and as you mentioned, I was what they at Harvard called the dual concentrator, elsewhere called the double major, right? But of East Asian languages and civilizations, and then folklore and mythology, studying kind of this traditional stuff. I'm looking at it, and I actually wrote my bachelor's thesis exploring the dynamic of how national symbols in Korea were revitalized after the Korean War, when the division between North and South required South Korea to create a martial tradition that they looked up to, because Koreans traditionally were more scholarly and less martial, and they had to revitalize ancient images of what were called the Hwara, which were warriors from the early Silla dynasty, and create a meaning in that to motivate their youth, because it was universal military conscription. So I looked at many of these old things. And I was an undergraduate, so I didn't look in a lot of source text, but looked at this creation and revitalization of a martial tradition and how that occurred and how that had relevance to the modern day, and how that intertwined with the development of the modern Korean martial arts, most famous of which is Taekwondo, which then spread all over the world and became Olympic martial art. But then I wound up living in Korea, and I lived there, and I was teaching and working, and I was teaching English and working there, and was doing martial arts, was studying martial arts there, having a grand time. I got my jaw broken. Excuse me, I got my jaw broken early, got my knee kicked, and I damaged my knee severely. Had a pretty bad situation with my knee. Western medicine helped me a little bit, didn't take me the whole way. And my martial arts teacher was an acupuncturist, an herbalist, and he treated it every day, 3 months. And I couldn't train, but I would hobble over to his school, and he would treat me there because he had clinical space attached to his school. And it was not that comfortable. Those who have gone and had acupuncture say, oh, it's comfortable. This was intense. This was not so comfortable. This was very therapeutic, but lying on the table wasn't the therapeutic part. The result afterwards was. And I had a wonderful recovery. And I was there. It took 3 months. And every day I would get there early and I would be a little despondent. I wasn't able to train and practice. And I would pull down his books that he had while I was waiting. And I would read them, look at them. I'd look at the meridians. I'd look at this, I'd look at that. I'd ask him some questions. I wouldn't completely really understand what he was telling me about it. And I would get treated. And then I had such a wonderful result. I said, you know what? Maybe I should study this stuff. And that turned the course of what I did to study medicine and move in that direction. So I never stopped doing martial arts. And through that teacher of mine, Kim Yong, I was then introduced to his teacher, Yi Guangzhou, who eventually became one of my teachers because my first teacher, he actually emigrated to Australia, interestingly. And he went to Australia and I started to study. I went up the level up to his teacher, Yi Guangzhou, who then became my direct teacher. And Master Li was also a medical practitioner. He had studied acupuncture, he had studied herbal medicine, he studied qigong, he had studied physical manipulation. The majority of his practice was physical manipulation and qigong, although what the Koreans call qigong, same word pronounced a little differently. Well, I went to medical school in Korea, in Korean, and at the same time, I apprenticed with Master Li, started martial arts intensely as a disciple, someone who's so dedicated to it. You say, oh, I'm going to uphold the tradition. But also would intern in his clinic. And that's how I learned physical manipulation, by apprenticing with him and learned my first exposure to what the Chinese called Qigong and the Koreans called Qigong. And that was a great experience. And he was a very nice man and very intense and a very, very, very intense martial artist. But we would help the patients, practice martial arts, and I would go to school. So I was living an austere life, almost monkish, right? Just practicing, training. But it was wonderful. It was great. And then from there, eventually came back to the States, went for further schooling. Part of the reason I went for further schooling is because of reciprocity laws. As any foreign trained MD knows, it's sometimes hard to get licensure in the States. You have to go for further training, or you have to go into a slightly different discipline. That happened to me also. Though I had graduated there in Korea, I here had to go into further training to sit for the licensure boards and such. And I'm glad I did, because it brought me into the understanding of, wait a minute, why did Korean, Chinese, Japanese things, why did they separate out in terms of medicine? But also along the way, pursuing those studies, I was exposed to other teachers, both of medicine and the martial arts. So that's how I more further studied the martial arts, Japanese, Chinese approaches, other approaches. But it's been a circuitous journey back and forth. But a lot of times, medicine and martial arts are tied together. One reason, martial arts get hurt. Other reason, if you work with patients, if you're a medical provider, you have to be brave. You got to be strong enough to bear what they tell you, because they're coming in to unburden themselves. And sometimes the story of what happened to them is intense. And you have to be bold enough, strong enough to listen to it, to not look away from it, to be strong. And in that strength, then come to a solution for them. That's why historically in Asia, many times, you see in medical clinics statues to Guan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And Guan Yin means to hear all things and see all things. That's the word itself. The name Guan Yin is actually, Guan is to see and Yin is to hear. To see and hear all things as they are. That's being compassionate. But at the same time, they often have in those same clinics a statue to Guangong. Guangong is General Guan, who is a protector. He's a historical general from 1800 years ago, and he is the protector of people. He's often the protector of children. He is the patron of martial arts and the patron of people who are self-employed, who work to support themselves and support others. But that's a warrior. They have those oftentimes in medical clinics. You have compassion and warriorship tied together. And then in traditional clinics, a lot of times they have a sword. They have a sword, symbolically. Because a sword represents the ability to cut through a problem, but it could cut you if you're not careful with it. It represents your mind. You can solve a problem, or you can mess things up. So those two ideas of martiality and medicine tied together. Right? So that's kind of the path I kind of wandered through. And as you mentioned in my bio, even though I worked at the University of Bridgeport as the chair of the doctoral program and other places and practice and I've taught continuing education for medicine. I've always practiced the martial arts and taught the martial arts. And a lot of it was through the Police Activity League, which is a volunteer group, and for underserved areas, both with judo and then with their special needs unit. And we still do a lot of special needs. I do a large amount of special needs training in the school I run now, where we do specialized one-on-ones with kids who are on the spectrum or with other physical disabilities. And we personalize that. We do an assessment, we do an evaluation, figure out what to do, what muscular kinetic change they need to work on, what neuroproprioceptive dynamics they need to train in. So the medicine never disappeared from it. So even though I say, oh, I'm retired from medicine, it's like the mafia. You can't get out, right? So you're always kind of in it. And so that continues to be part of what we do.
I have to confess that coming to the dojo, it feels so good to feel contained. And I don't know how you do it, like how you offer this container of safety. And you always say there is no safe way to teach martial arts, but for a practitioner of, like, as you just mentioned, you have to hold space for all these people who come to unburden themselves. So as a practitioner, I have to deconstruct, and I imagine at your level it's even more hard, because I have to deconstruct the narrative that we weave around pain and how we deal with pain, especially in our society that always wants to suppress and avoid pain at all costs. So I am just wondering, how do you view trauma, and what's your philosophy around trauma? We've seen some around the mat, so it's part of our life. But how do you deconstruct that?
That's a big question, and I think you're right. I think people are afraid of pain. People also are often afraid of sensation, and they're afraid of engagement. And somehow we've created a narrative that things are supposed to be always sunshine and rainbows. And that's not necessarily the case. So in many ways, I feel like because society has become so divorced from nature, right? Many people, depending on what part of the world, many people live separated from the natural world. They're not farmers, right? They don't have to walk to the next village. They don't have to carry things from one place to another. They have a car. They put things in there. They go to work. A lot of our work is very abstract. Maybe it's principle driven, especially in this part of the world. In North America, there's a large part of the population that's like that. Not all. There's parts of the population that are disenfranchised. Part of the population has to commodify their health to work, right? A lot of people who were quote unquote essential workers during the pandemic, who no matter how dangerous it was, they had to go in. They had to go and clean the hospitals and do things. And there's a lot of people who are working, even in this part of the world, who work in a very hard physical dynamic. And whether they're happy, sad, it's a rainy day, it's a rough day, they're depressed, they got to get up and go to work because stuff got to get done, right? They just got to get done. So that's more like what most people experience in the traditional world, in the pre-modern world, where you had to go through and suffer through no matter what, with the expectation that it is as it is. You get what you get. You don't get upset. And some days are good, some days ain't. But I think in common parlance, in our modern North American society, we kind of bought into a narrative that's a little more Cinderella-esque. Happily ever after. And if you're not happy, well, maybe that's a medical problem. Is it? It can be. Some people are clinically depressed. Some people have, issues that are there, and I would never deny that, and we could treat that and work with that. Sure. But sometimes being unhappy is where you're supposed to be. Because sometimes being unhappy is what leads to something else. It's what leads to change. Maybe you got to get sick and tired of where you're at, and then you start making a change, right? So everybody who's in some sort of self-help program, like Alcoholics Anonymous or something, sometimes they got to get to the bottom of the barrel before they start going up. Or there's a self-help expert who said, one time, if you fall down, try to land on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up, right? Sometimes you got to fall down. So when we come to the martial arts and we come to the challenges of it, well, yes, we try to create a safe space of it. We try to create a safe space where you're there and you're going to practice, and where you shouldn't be afraid you're going to get hurt, injured, but you're going to get challenged. And you're challenged just to stand in a deeper stance, just to move more quickly, just to hit pads faster than you think you can, to take someone, maybe throw them, maybe wrestle with them, take them over, hold them down. Someone's trying to hold you down, right? These are staged challenges. In many ways, they're play acting. And I don't mean that to denigrate the martial arts at all, but they are staged responses that are kept safe so that you can be put into a level of ever increasing affective filter. Now we got fancy words, right? So affective filter, affect is emotion, and the emotional filter. So there's an emotional filter with dealing with everything. Waking up in the morning, going downstairs and making a cup of coffee. Well, some days you're like, I don't know if I could do it, right? The emotional challenge of just doing something simple like that seems maybe a little insurmountable because you had a rough week, a rough day, whatever it is. Other days you pop out of bed like a daisy and go running downstairs and it's all good. So the emotional filter of what goes on every day shifts around and changes constantly. And that's natural. Sometimes you go someplace and just a smell of something reminds you of the greatest day you ever had or the worst day you ever had. And it puts the affective filter, the emotional filter that's going on at that moment, spins on a dime. And that's everyone. And you mentioned trauma. People who have had trauma, that emotional filter sometimes spins into the negative and stays there. Gets stuck. Can't spin back out. And in many ways, that's post-traumatic stress disorder, where your response to stress is disorderly. It doesn't have the same orderly progression as someone else. And so therefore, sometimes they dissociate, they shut down, very emotional, things like that, because that affective filter spins. Now in the martial arts, what we do is we have to practice skills that require an increasing stress factor, increasing affective filter. That's the same as medicine, because in medicine, you have to act in a timely fashion. You can't keep the patient there for 7 hours while you figure out what to do, right? You have to act in a timely fashion, in their best interest, and also their metabolic reserve of how much treatment and change the body can handle at once demands the practitioner to move at a timely pace. Therefore, there's an affective filter, there's a stress filter that comes up. You have to act quickly enough to be effective, but clearly enough to not have a negative effect on the person. And so medicine and martial arts have a relationship there. So when we go to the mat, we have to bring the stress factors up. We have to slowly do it. You do it once, you do it twice, you're learning something. Great. Go team. Yay. As you do it, well, we go from nice Sifu Steve to less nice Sifu Steve. When I put the pressure on him. And I always tell him, pressure makes coal into diamonds. Got to get better, right? And we always encourage them. But at the same time, I often say to any of the students, I say, that's the best you can do? Really? That's good. That's the best you can do? That's as hard as you can work? Right? We'll push them to be better, to put that pressure on and improve. And sometimes people cry. People get upset. And I'm not talking about just children. Adults get overloaded, right? And I tell them all the time, tears of weakness leaving your body, right? There's nothing wrong with your emotions. There's another part where you said before, we have this narrative in the North American modern world. Oh, I'm supposed to be happy all the time. I'm not supposed to cry. Whether it's like, oh, I'm a guy, I'm a man, I'm a boy, I don't cry. Or, oh, save your tears for your pillow. But why do we reject emotionality? Why do we reject being emotional? Why do we reject getting overloaded? Why do we reject feeling upset? Right? So a lot of the training in the martial arts is a safe space, a controlled environment where you can experience those things and bring them out. And use the word before, dojo. That's the Japanese word, dojo. Right? Dojang is the Korean word. Chinese often say wuguan, or traditionally they say daochang. But daochang, dojo, dojang, Korean, those are the same word. And those words mean a hall of the Tao, a hall of the path. What path? Well, that word Tao, which we've talked about in Taoism, it's actually first used by Confucius to mean something bigger then it's base meaning. The base meaning of that word is road, like a road in front of your house. And Confucius is the first guy who says, wo you dao de. I have a dao, a road to de, to virtue. I have a road to virtue. And the word then expanded in the meaning from a physical road, then goes and spreads to become a very powerful word in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese language to mean, a path to understanding, a path to being better. And that's why we apply it to the martial arts. And that's why we often call the martial arts training hall a daochang in Chinese, or wuguan, which means martial hall, a dojo in Japanese, or dojang in Korean, but it's a space where you explore that down. So it's a space of exploration, not necessarily a war school, right? It's something else. So that's why we got to create the safe space. We got to have those techniques and those dynamics. We got to work with ourselves, work with others. We got to get pushed a little bit to experience and face both inside us and outside us in relationship to the outside world and the inside world. And that's the part where we can address aspects where someone's had a traumatic response, no matter how large or small it is, but in a way that we do it slowly, specifically, carefully, and work through it. And that's what everybody's had trauma wants to do. Because trauma freezes you in one moment. And that moment's somewhere in the past. And like ice, it freezes. If we can melt that ice, then water starts to flow. Then we can flow through it, to the present, keep moving forward.
And you always talk about this concept of interrupting a narrative. So if you can talk a little bit about this concept and some practical examples from the mat.
Great. That's a big idea. So self-defense is a big topic. I mean, just in general. And self-defense is often a misunderstood topic because self-defense is often a term applied after something goes on. So after someone got punched in the nose, right? They get punched in the nose and someone says, well, that was self-defense. Was it? It was a punch in the nose, right? Or a stomp in the foot, or a kick between the legs where the sun doesn't shine. There's some action. Later on, we say, oh, that was self-defense. That's why I did it. But it is an action. It's an action that is a violent action. And we call it, in self-defense theory, an interruption, in the sense of the bad guy, as we perceive the bad guy, has a narrative, has a story that he or she is playing out in the head. And the story might be, how dare you insult me because you're in a club together or you're in a party or you get an argument. How dare you do that to me? And the bad guy is justifying, well, you can't do that to me because I'm so-and-so. I have intrinsic value. And even the bad guy preserves his or her view of their own self as being a positive actor. Even the mafioso thinks I'm a positive actor. How dare they don't respect me because I'm this person, right? So that's one type of situation that can get you into self-defense where that person's acting in their perception that you've slighted them. How dare you? And they have a narrative. I have to prove to you who I am, and I have to prove to you the hierarchy, and therefore you have to acquiesce to the hierarchy. If you understand that, you could dissolve it by acquiescing to the hierarchy. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I did not realize. And you could often walk your way out of that, talk your way out of that. But people often don't. When someone yells, do you know who I am? Right? How dare you? The other person says, and they're rude. Now, I got two little stories about this. And one of them is at a martial arts tournament where a judge and a coach, both very accomplished martial artists, started getting mad at each other because of what was playing out in the match. And the coach, who was a 7th degree black belt, black belts go in levels. If your listeners don't know, black belts are kind of go in levels, meaning how long you've been, how much you've taught, how much more stuff you've learned, and you work your way up. But they get more honorary the higher you get. But it's like getting a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD, then a postdoc, and then these accolades. Sure, but if someone had a 7th degree black belt, they've been doing martial arts for probably 40 years. Okay, the other person has, I'm not quite sure how high, 3rd or 4th, whatever it might be, but they've both been in martial arts for years, well accomplished. And the one who was a coach got really mad because he didn't like the call that was made in the scoring. Started yelling from the sideline. And wasn't really appropriate. He was like a coach in a football game getting all heated up, and he was yelling. And he started yelling, oh, it's ridiculous, and started getting on the verge of actually cursing a little bit. And the ref in the middle started getting really mad and yelling at him. And the coach on the side yelled, you don't know who I am. You don't know who I am. And the one in the middle started yelling, you don't know who I am. And next thing you know, they were just about to hit each other. And one of these guys was in his 70s, and the other guy is in his 50s. I'm not saying how it would go in the fight, but one of the directors, who's an accomplished martial artist, had to step in and say, guys, his parents watching. His kids watching. What's going on? You gonna fight each other? And he diffused it. All right, but here, guys with a lot of training, they fell into this ego trap. Okay. Meanwhile, here's another example of this. Very simple. Okay. I had a situation years ago at the university where I helped to host a conference that came in from the Music and Medicine Association that Adina, you're part of. And they came in and we had to get from the people who were from facilities maintenance, we had to get microphones. So we worked with the one Office of External Affairs to get all the permits and get everything set, but they didn't communicate in a timely fashion to facilities that we need microphones. So I said, oh, okay, well, I'll go talk to them. And they go, oh, be careful. You got to talk to the head of facilities. And they kind of gave me a look like, I'm like, what am I in for? So I go and I speak to this lady who, she was maybe in her early 60s and looked pretty demure. I mentioned what we needed, and she became the greatest dragon you've ever seen. And her back went up, and she was like, oh my God, how could they not? And she just, in a moment, I was like, oh, I'm in for it now. I'm in for it now. And I could have easily, because we had the right to have the microphones we needed. We had filled out the permits. We got the permission from the group that was higher up, from the part of the bureaucracy that was higher up, that commanded her department. But she was head of that department, and dear God, they didn't fill out that form in triplicate and give it in 3 weeks in advance. And I said, and I saw this, and in that moment, I saw the narrative. The narrative was, you don't know who I am. And her power dynamic, and the challenge to her power dynamic. And that narrative in her mind meant my claws are coming out, and I'm going to rip a hole through whoever. And I was like, oh. So this is, again, self-defense. She wasn't going to hit me. But I immediately said, oh, they didn't tell you? They didn't tell you? How could... I filled out that paperwork 8 weeks ago, and I said to them, they got to make sure everybody needs to know. I go, I can't believe they didn't tell you. That's ridiculous. I know. I work in another department, but I have people underneath me. I know paperwork's got to get done. I know it's got to get done. I go, to be all honest with you, I said, I'm bringing in people. This is a different association from outside the university, and it's a bunch of musicians, and you know how disorganized those guys are. And it took forever to get that paperwork, and I had to get it to them, and they didn't tell you. I said, if I had known, I would have told you 6 weeks ago. But they didn't tell me. You know what they're like in that other office. Oh, I go, I don't want that. I said, I'll go, we'll talk to the music guys, see if they can bring their own mics. This is ridiculous. No, it's too late. It's too late. All of a sudden, claws went back. No, sorry. It's right. I go, are you sure? I go, because I'll go back there. I'll give them a piece of my mind. No. We had everything we needed and then some. So, and you might say, your listeners might say, that's self-defense. I go, yeah, because I preserved her and I preserved us. I preserved without the clash. Now, my two dear friends in the martial arts who were fighting each other, I call them friends, even though I only know them peripherally, right? That they were fighting each other at that tournament and get mad. They didn't preserve each other. Their narratives interacted improperly. Right, so the director interrupted the narrative and stopped the situation, preserving both of them. I interrupted the narrative at the university from the administrator and preserved relationship. That's what we talk about, the narrative. So if we take it to a self-defense situation where someone's going to hit you, someone's going to attack you, something like that. If it's not perceived in that way, there's a narrative that the bad guy has in his or her head, and they're looking for someone to play a role, someone to play the victim role. And if we go to the far end of the spectrum, someone who's going to try to take someone to a secondary location, hurt them, like you see in crime dramas. right? They're looking for someone who fits the narrative. Certain look, certain hair color, certain size, certain physical build that reminds them of someone who hurt them years ago. And they're playing out a story, a narrative. They're looking for the victim to fit the narrative. If you interrupt that, you interrupt the storyline, there's your biggest self-defense tool. So one, awareness. See where someone's interviewing you to fit the narrative of their violence. And that's in many ways. Are they getting too close to you on the subway platform? Are they invading your space? Are they bumping into you? What are they doing? Are they looking to make direct eye contact and see your eye contact as a challenge? Right? That's one question. So you can, first of all, fail the interview. That's the interview you want to fail because you don't want to be cast into that drama in their mind. Second, they're expecting to behave a certain way. They're looking for someone who plays properly the victim mentality. And in the victim mentality, if they play the victim mentality, they're playing on your niceness. They're playing on your idea that I'm going to stay within certain social roles, certain social behaviors, and they're going to push that limit a little bit. And then they're going to take advantage of you. And that taking advantage of you could be take your money. And taking advantage of you could be hurt you. And taking advantage of you could be take you to a secondary location, which is never a good thing. Right? So you got to interrupt that narrative. Don't play into that narrative. No matter what the social implication. No matter how weird other people might think you are on the subway platform for yelling at somebody and walking away. Right? So again, interrupt the narrative. Sometimes the interruption of the narrative has to be you strike back. Sometimes you have to hit. Now in self-defense, you have to hit someone and then leave. Because you don't hit someone and wait for the score. That's sports. That's where sports and self-defense diverge radically. And in sports, you hit scoring zones. In self-defense, you don't. Everything that would get you a foul in a sporting contest, that's what you do in self-defense. You hit him in the throat. You hit him in the knee. You poke him in the eye. You hit him where the sun don't shine. You operate in ways that will get you fouled. You push them and run. In a contest, pushing the person back. You never see boxers do that. They don't push each other across the ring. Why? It doesn't progress the match. And they get in trouble because they're delaying the game. In self-defense, we call it the tactical shove. Push them. Interrupt the narrative. Their narrative wants them close. Your narrative says, no. Push them away. That's an interruption. But it requires you to interrupt your social narrative. Because your social narrative is, I'm a nice person. I do this. I live in this well-organized social world that only exists in your mind. And you have to be able to interrupt that, switch that off, and then switch it back on. So one little story about this. Someone I know, a young lady, was some homeless person. This is when she was going to college. Some homeless person said, hey, can you give me some money for food? And she said, no, but they were in front of, I don't know, CVS or 7-Eleven, something like that. She said, no, but I'll buy you something. And he goes, okay. Goes inside, and she said, well, you can buy one thing. And he starts getting more things and more things and more things. And she starts, well, no, I can't. And he starts getting loud. And he kind of pressured her to spend like $30 on buying things because he was making a scene. And she got all emotional and taken advantage of. Well, he played his narrative, but he also played off her social narrative of what's okay and how she would be embarrassed if someone knew that she was getting pressured and that they would all be looking at her. And so part of self-defense is understanding when you have to interrupt both their narrative and your narrative inside yourself of how is it okay to act. When is it okay to act? Most basic idea, someone shakes your hand, that's your friend. Someone grabs your wrist, ain't your friend. Someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, buddy, how's the day going? Great. Someone grabs your shoulder, not your friend. And I always say to students, I go, the moment they grab you in a different way, it's on like Pokemon. That's the joke, right? And it's 10,000 years ago. It's 10,000 BC. And all the social rules disappeared because no one gets to touch you that way. And you have to condition that in your mind to interrupt both their narrative and your own narrative of how you're supposed to behave. Because you're supposed to behave in a way that preserves yourself and ideally and hopefully preserves the other.
Yeah, if I can share from my own experience, I was interviewed, unfortunately, in such a way. When I was 12, I was going home. We lived in this communist, Romanian communist building, and the lights were always dimmed in the hallway. So somebody followed me, and I didn't realize it was an intruder, and he grabbed me from behind in the dark. So I was just 12 and I didn't realize what's happening. And I said, "Leave me alone. I'm just hungry." And I hit him and I ran on the stairs. So I failed the interview. But from that day on, we put a lock at the building and we realized it's not safe to come in the dark. So since we are running out of time, I'm going to ask you the last question. You are running a very successful dojo. We have a lot of competitions and you are training students to compete at national and even international levels. So what are some of your biggest achievements as teacher? Maybe also if you can share some personal achievements as a competitor. And what practical advice would you offer to a martial arts student? And I realize we are at different levels, so maybe someone on the intermediate level.
That's a great question. Well, and again, one of the things is when I decided to do a martial arts school full time, I still teach continuing education medicine. I still have some writing projects I'm working on. I do consult with some of the medical students I've had. They call me up and we run cases. So you never really completely get out of medicine. And as I mentioned, we work with the special needs kids a lot. So, but to look at the parts in the question, one of the things is we compete a lot. We compete from the get-go, from the beginning. We have beginners compete. We compete in-house with each other. We sometimes in class divide to two lines, and the two lines compete against each other in jumping jacks and sit-ups and push-ups and how many kicks can you do in 30 seconds. And we compete all the time. And one of the things about being a competitor is the world's intrinsically competitive. And that's not a bad thing. It is. And here's where, in my opinion, people fall down in understanding competition. Because people judge competition as black and white, win-lose. And competition is not like that. If you want to be a competitor, in general, you got to start to appreciate the competition, not win-lose. I got to compete. I got to do it. Wow. I got to kick as many kicks as I could. Right? I got to do as many throws as I could. I got to go and do this. And I fought a good game. And I lost. But I fought a good game. I didn't run away. I didn't turn my back. I faced myself. Because my fear would be to run away, to not do it, or to freeze. I acted. That's the winning. So part of it in competition in general, when we have a competition coming up, we compete in different leagues, right? Different types of leagues, different types of tournaments, different formats of it. But no matter what, we practice on it. I've often told the students the day before, because we practice and we do open mat training, which is extra training, like come to study hall and practice and practice, practice. I tell them the day before the tournament, I go, you already won. You already won.
I always like the Sifu before the tournament, and I'm afraid of the Sifu before the belt test.
That's okay. That's all right. But first of all, I said, if you're practicing how much, you already won. You go to the next day, you have fun, you compete, whatever you get. I go, because you already won. You put all the effort in. You already won. And all your hard work turns to gold. Whether it's a little medal or it's a big trophy, it doesn't matter. And especially like with the little kids, they go, I only got a medal. I go, only? I go, you got a medal. They got like a 7th place medal. I go, that's great. You got a medal. I go, your hard work turned to gold. Gold you can wear around your neck and take to school. And when the kids go, what's that? You go, yeah, I was in a martial arts competition. Yeah, I got a medal. I had to fight for it. I go, they're sitting home playing Xbox. You did all that. You did weeks of practice. And you did well. I go, that's the value of competition. That's what we need to groom into people. Not, I'm a loser because I lost. No. You're a loser because you didn't do. If you didn't do. If you did, you practiced, you developed, you learned, you got better. You worked well. And then afterwards, we do a post-tournament assessment form. Literally a form that we fill out. And it says, what I do well. And they have to list what they did well first, whoever the competitor is. What did I not do so well? What's my objective for next time? And then what's the training I'm going to do to get there? So this I feel helps them a lot. It helps everyone who's a competitor. Why? Because it says, I did something good. I went and I did. And what could I do better? Then what do I want from the next competition? Because it builds into the mindset. There's a next one. The next one's coming. The next time I go in. The next time I do this. I want to get out of that. How do I get there? And that's the training of success. That's what the competitions are about. The training of success. How do I get there? How do I get there? How do I get there? Right? And that's the magic in it. The magic is the practice I do. Then get what you get. You don't get upset. Right? So you said like biggest successes. A couple of big successes. Right? One little boy who is special needs. He is on a spectrum, but he's technically more what we would call Asperger's. So he physically can move, though he's a little awkward. He is in a mainstream classroom, but he has a lot of trouble just kind of dealing with the way the world works around him. And he's incredibly anxious. Incredibly. Well, we've practiced his one-on-one class because he can't handle going to group class. Well, he has gone to already now 2 league tournaments and competed. And he said, all I want to do is get a medal. All I want to do is get a medal. And medals go out up to the 8th place. So it's not too hard to get a medal, but as opposed to a trophy. All I want to do is get a medal. I want to get a medal because his neurotypical sister has gotten trophies for dance and such like that. So we've worked, and he's overcome that anxiety. He's been able to go and compete and do a real simple sword form with a practice sword, and do a real simple self-defense demonstration with another student. We'll get medals. And his mom is overjoyed because he's been able to rise to the occasion. And she said he never would speak at all in class. Now he's answering a couple of questions here and there. So he's winning the game. That's a big victory. Okay. And then recently, one of our students who's 9, Grace, we traveled to another city, up to Olean, New York, up there, and competed in a sport jiu-jitsu tournament. And sport jiu-jitsu involves kicking and punching and taking them off their feet, and at the younger ages holding them down in pins. And as you get older, it gets submissions where you get to choke into armbar. But it's the traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. So she competed, and she's a very good competitor. Competed many times in many formats, and even at only 9 years old, she's actually even done full contact fighting, which they have within the traditional Japanese karate leagues. Very good competitor. She lost her first match. Her strategy didn't work. The kid took her down. She was working in a way against a kid from another school, and he caught her. Now, this is a double elimination tournament. A double elimination tournament is where you lose, you're not out. You go into a loser's bracket, and you have to fight your way back up. So she was teary-eyed, about to cry. And I said to her, I said, cry, you won't cry. I said, but you got more work to do. I said, you got more work to do. You got more matches ahead of you. I said, so you cry it out. You dry your tears. I go, we'll get back on the mat. And I go, you got to let that go. I go, only a fool fights a battle that's already done. Like, that's over. That's over. You can't change that. That's over. But you can change what comes up. You got to bring your game. And now you know. You got to win. Either you win or you learn. You got to learn. You want to cross with your throw? He had your number on that. He dropped low in the stance, took you backwards. So you got to watch for that. When you go for that throw, you go in there, you grab him, you step across. He won't go. Someone doesn't go. You got to drop on your knee. Generate momentum. Well, now you know. I go get some water. Just wait it out. I'm going on the mat again. She had other matches come up. She fought her way up. And every match, there's 2 rounds. 2 1.5-minute rounds. They're long. She fights her way up, wins. Fights her way up, wins. Fights her way up, wins. She's coming up the loser bracket, working her way back up. Fight, composure. Fight, composure. She meets the same kid that she fought in the first match because he didn't win every match he had. They meet again, and the winner of that's going to go into the semifinals. And I said, all right, you know what you got to do. I said, you got to bring your game. So she brought her game. She had better strategy. She knows when we go to the ground, his ground game was strong, how to hold her positions, right? How to throw, how to avoid what's going on, that he was weaker in his kicks and punches, right? She won. Great. She won that match. She goes on. She's now going to semifinals. Semifinals. She's 9. That little girl's 9. At 9, you hit your growth spurt, you get bigger. So she's a certain height, about 4 foot tall. The other girl's like 5 foot tall, like almost a whole foot taller. They're both the same age. It's just the way it is. And I go, you got to fight your game. She's fighting her game. But she goes and they go to the ground. She's trying to hold her position. The other girl can literally just physically lift her up, hold her into position. Right? And she's fighting. I go, you got to keep fighting. She loses the first round. All right. But she fought like a tiger. And I said to her, in between the rounds, I said, all right. I said, you got to do something. Like, you got to jump kick this little girl in the head, or you got to do what we call rolling thunder, where you do a forward roll at him. And I go, you got to do something. I got to go outside the box. You got to work more. And she's working. She's trying to take this girl down. She's like, okay, boom. And we're getting towards the end of the time period. And I just yell out to her. I said, now's the time. I go, if rolling thunder's going to happen, now's the time. She positions. She's move. She just pulls off rolling thunder. She rolls, kicks the girl in the belt. She lost the match. She was behind her points. She pulled off the most impressive moves. Lost the match. Right? They bow it out. You have to go, after you bow it, you go to the other coach and you say thank you, and then you come back. And I go, what are you crying for? I said, what are you getting upset for? I go, there's no dishonor to lose to the worthy opponent. I go, you fought amazingly. I go, nothing to be upset about. You just wait, get your medal. All right. So she waits. Then she stayed with me while we coached another player because she didn't want to go back to her parents because she was, and she wrote it out. Fine. It's good. Because I said, you got another division. She's going to play the groundwork division. Another thing's coming up. Fine. I said, but so we go on, and now the tail end of the story. Not that she got a third. That was one of the most hard-fought third-place medals she ever got. But she wound up getting an award called the Tony Maynard Award for Sport Jiu-Jitsu, who's one of the founders of Sport Jiu-Jitsu League. And it was an award for the best Sport Jiu-Jitsu fighter in the whole tournament. So out of the 200-some-odd people in the tournament, the judges, the administrators, everyone, they saw this, and the judges had called over the administrators to watch this, and they made this announcement. They said, at the end when they were giving out these big awards, they said, well, we were torn between a couple of different people, but one of them, this is not an award for who wins. They go, it's an award who evidences the qualities of the martial arts: composure, dedication, the ability to control yourself in stressful situations, to have a setback and come back. Because the old saying is, everybody loves a comeback, but no one likes a setback. And they said the player that they're going to give this to showed that. And in the midst of all this, when it was clear in points there's no way they could catch up, they pulled off one of the most impressive techniques you can do, rolling thunder kick. And they gave her the award. And it's a big plaque with a bear on it, like this symbol of power. And it was amazing. And that's a success not for getting the trophy, not for getting the medal, not for getting whatever, but to say, okay, the training in the martial arts, this will set this young lady up for success. And when asked what she wants to be when she grows up, she says, I think I want to be a doctor and maybe a sensei. So whatever she devotes her life to, whether it's that or something else, the challenges, the training, all this, that's the formula of success. So that's one of the big things. How we bring and train success through competition. And the last part of that question, you said, what about as a competitor? Because I still dust myself off and go into competition. When I go into competition, I'm not worried about what I win, but I go in what we amongst ourselves, the people who are in my division, we call ourselves the OGs, the original gangsters, right? Because it's all older teachers and everything, and every time we get together, we're like, oh, good, you're here. Hey, what's going on? Because I see them regularly, but we're older. And being able to get on the mat regularly, being able to go and do this, being able to move and keep active, that's how we're winning the game. So it's not whether they get first, second, third, fourth, but it's a matter, do you keep doing it? And that's the advice for all competitors, right? You have to say, wait a minute, I gotta love the game. I gotta love the movement. I gotta love that I'm in it. That every day the divine gives me another chance to express myself in motion, express those internal qualities externally on the mat, and that's why we keep doing it. And that's why our school has reached a certain level of success, because we try to bring those internal qualities out in every direction.
So, as your student for almost 3 years, I can testify that the container of self-knowledge, safety, readiness, confidence, emotional regulation, and body fitness that Kung Fu offers me and my colleagues is incredible. So I don't know of any training system that is more potent for disembodying old patterns and accelerating evolution at all levels. So I'm very grateful for everything that you taught us. And it's such an honor to be your student. I actually received my disciple invitation this week. So I'm very proud of it. I'm very happy. And with that, how can you be found? And if you are teaching only in person or online, how can people find you?
So certainly they can come to our website, which is www.classicalma.com. They can come there and see all the stuff we're doing in martial arts. Okay. Also, my email's on there. If they email into us, I do continuing education in Chinese medicine, so they can find out about that. We do most of our stuff in the martial arts is in person. We actually are hoping to launch later this year some online Tai Chi, online Qigong programs that would be available. But you'd have to watch the website for that and look for updates. But if you go there and check it out, then you can get on the mailing list and we can keep you updated on all the fun things that we do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much. And hopefully, as we were able to on your listeners had a good time.